The planet Zetheris was not like Earth. It was cold, metallic, and precise in every way. The Valons, the species that called it home, were beings of logic and reason. They lived in towering cities made of shimmering silver spires, where everything ran on schedules so exact that even a fraction of a second's delay could cause chaos. Emotions were considered inefficient among the Valons. Their lives revolved around facts, calculations, and progress. But recently, something unusual had happened. A decision had been made by their council to send one of their own to Earth as part of an intergalactic cultural exchange program. The chosen Valon was Kale. Kale was young by Valon standards, barely into his third cycle of existence. He was curious about other species, but also cautious. When he heard about the mission, he volunteered without hesitation. The idea of studying humans fascinated him. From what little data the Valons had gathered, humans seemed irrational, unpredictable, and messy. But they were also creative, resilient, and full of potential. Kale wanted to understand them better. So after weeks of preparation, he stepped into the teleportation chamber, ready to begin his journey. When Kale arrived on Earth, he materialized in the middle of a dense forest. The air smelled different here, earthy and alive. Birds chirped loudly above him, and leaves rustled softly in the breeze. For a moment, Kale stood still, absorbing the sensation of being surrounded by nature. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. Then, a voice broke the silence. "Hello? Are you there?" Kale turned toward the sound. A woman emerged from between the trees, carrying a basket filled with wildflowers. She looked human, just as the files had described. Her hair was a shade of brown that reminded Kale of the soil beneath his feet, and her eyes sparkled with warmth. This was Clara Bennett, his host for the next 3 months. Clara smiled brightly as she approached him. "You must be Kale. I'm so glad you're finally here." Kale tilted his head slightly, analyzing her expression. Humans communicated a lot through their faces, he remembered reading. Smiling meant happiness or friendliness. He mimicked her, gesture awkwardly, though his lips barely curved upward. "Yes, I am Kale." "Well, come on then," Clara said cheerfully, gesturing for him to follow her. "My house isn't far from here." They walked together along a narrow path lined with tall trees. Clara chatted animatedly about the weather, her garden, and how excited she was to have him stay with her. Kale listened carefully, trying to make sense of her words. Humans spoke quickly and often jumped from one topic to another without warning. It was disorienting. By the time they reached Clara's house, Kyle felt overwhelmed. The structure was small compared to Valon buildings, with wooden walls painted white and flower boxes hanging under the windows. Inside, the space was cluttered yet cozy. There were shelves crammed with books, photographs framed on the walls, and rugs scattered across the floor. To Kale, it all seemed chaotic, but Clara moved through it effortlessly, humming a tune as she set down the basket of flowers. "This is your room," Clara said, opening a door at the end of the hallway. The room was simple, a bed, a desk, and a lamp. But Kale found it strange. Everything was soft and rounded, nothing like the sleek, angular designs back home. Still, he nodded politely. "Thank you. No problem," Clara replied. "Make yourself comfortable. Dinner will be ready soon." Dinner turned out to be an entirely new experience for Kale. Clara served him something called spaghetti, which consisted of long, twisted strands covered in a red sauce. She explained that it was food, but Kale hesitated. Back on Zetheris, meals came in neatly packaged capsules designed for maximum efficiency. This was messy. "It's good," Clara assured him, taking a bite herself. "Try it." Kale picked up a fork cautiously and twirled some of the spaghetti onto it. As he brought it to his mouth, he noticed the smell, rich, tangy, and unfamiliar. He took a small bite and immediately frowned. The texture was strange, and the flavors clashed in ways he couldn't comprehend. Yet Clara watched him expectantly, waiting for his reaction. "It is acceptable," Cale said finally, setting the fork down. Clara laughed, a sound that startled him. "Acceptable? That's the best review I've gotten all week." Cale didn't understand why she found his comment amusing. Humans laughed at odd times, he noted mentally. Perhaps it was a form of communication he hadn't grasped yet. After dinner, Clara insisted on showing him around the house. She pointed out the bathroom, explaining how to use the shower and toilet. Kyle listened intently, though some of the instructions seemed unnecessarily complicated. Why did humans require so many steps for basic tasks? Later that night, as Cale lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, he thought about the day's events. Humans were indeed bizarre. They talked too much, ate strange foods, and lived in environments that lacked order. Yet there was something intriguing about Clara. Despite her quirks, she radiated kindness and curiosity. Maybe living with her wouldn't be so bad after all. The next morning, Kyle woke early, unable to sleep any longer. On Zetheris, days were measured differently, and his internal clock wasn't adjusted to Earth's rhythm. He wandered into the kitchen, where Clara was already making breakfast. She greeted him warmly, offering him coffee. "What is this?" Kyle asked, eyeing the steaming mug suspiciously. "It's coffee," Clara said. "It'll wake you up." Kyle sniffed it cautiously. The aroma was strong and bitter. He took a sip, expecting it to taste terrible, but instead he felt a jolt of energy surge through him. It was invigorating, almost like the energy boosters used on Zetheris. Perhaps humans weren't entirely irrational after all. As the days passed, Cale began to notice patterns in Clara's behavior. She liked to start her mornings with coffee and toast, spent hours tending to her garden, and often sang while doing chores. Her emotions fluctuated frequently. Sometimes she was happy, sometimes frustrated, and sometimes sad. Kyle tried to document everything in his notes, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't predict what she would do next. One afternoon, Clara decided to take Cale shopping. She drove them to a nearby town where they visited a large store filled with endless rows of products. Kyle marveled at the sheer variety of items available. There were dozens of types of bread, hundreds of snacks, and countless bottles of beverages. It was overwhelming. "Why do humans need so many options?" Kyle asked as they stood in front of a shelf stocked with cereal boxes. Clara shrugged. "I guess it's because we like having choices. Doesn't everyone?" Kyle shook his head. "On Zetheris, we have one type of nutrient capsule. It meets all our needs efficiently." Clara chuckled. "Well, humans aren't exactly efficient." That statement stayed with Cale long after they returned home. Humans weren't efficient, logical, or predictable. They were messy, emotional, and chaotic. And yet, there was a certain charm to their imperfections. Living with a human was extremely bizarre. But Cale couldn't deny that it was also fascinating. Cale was starting to get used to the rhythm of life on Earth, or at least as much as a Valon could. Every morning began with Clara's cheerful voice calling out that breakfast was ready. He still didn't fully understand why humans ate so many different foods, but he had grown accustomed to the taste of toast with butter and jam. It wasn't efficient like the nutrient capsules back home, but it wasn't unpleasant either. Clara often took him along on her daily activities, explaining that it would help him adjust faster. One day, she decided to teach him how to cook. She stood in the kitchen, tying an apron around her waist, while Cale watched carefully. Cooking, she explained, was one of the most important skills a human could have. To Cale, it seemed unnecessarily complicated. Back on Zetheris, meals were prepared by machines with perfect precision. Here, cooking involved chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and timing everything just right. "All right, let's start with something simple," Clara said, handing him a knife. "You can chop the carrots." Kale stared at the knife, then at the carrots on the cutting board. He had never held such a tool before. His hands were designed for delicate tasks, not slicing through organic matter. Slowly, he picked up the knife and attempted to mimic Clara's movements. The first few cuts were uneven, and one piece flew off the board entirely, landing on the floor. Clara laughed. "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it." Kyle frowned slightly. Humans found humor in mistakes, but to him, errors were unacceptable. Still, he continued trying, determined to master this strange skill. By the time they finished cooking, the meal was far from perfect, but Clara declared it delicious anyway. Kale wasn't sure if she meant it or was just being kind. As the days went by, Kale noticed that Clara enjoyed introducing him to new experiences. She played music for him, explaining that it was a way for humans to express emotions. The melodies were unfamiliar, but Kyle found himself drawn to the rhythm and patterns. Sometimes Clara would dance around the living room, twirling and laughing. Kyle observed her movements curiously, wondering why humans felt the need to move their bodies in such ways. When she invited him to join her, he declined politely, feeling too awkward to attempt it. One evening, Clara announced that she had invited a neighbor over for dinner. Kale tensed at the idea of meeting another human. So far, his interactions had been limited to Clara, who was patient and understanding. He wasn't sure how others would react to his presence. When the doorbell rang, Clara hurried to answer it, leaving Kale standing uncertainly in the hallway. The visitor was a man named Jake Miller. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with short dark hair and a wary expression. Clara introduced them quickly, explaining that Kale was part of a cultural exchange program. Jake nodded but didn't smile. Instead, he studied Kale closely, his eyes narrowing slightly. "So, where are you from again?" Jake asked during dinner. Kale hesitated. He couldn't reveal the truth about being an alien, so he stuck to the story Clara had prepared. "A distant country. Very different from here." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Kale thought carefully before answering. "Our customs and traditions are not like yours. We value efficiency above all else." Clara jumped in, sensing the tension. "Kale's learning a lot about how we do things here. Aren't you?" "Yes," Kale replied stiffly. "I am learning." Jake didn't seem convinced. Throughout the meal, he kept glancing at Kale, his suspicion growing. At one point, he made a joke about aliens visiting Earth, causing Clara to laugh nervously. Kyle froze, unsure how to respond. Humans joked about serious topics, but he didn't know if this particular joke was safe to acknowledge. After dinner, Jake excused himself, saying he needed to check on something outside. Clara followed him, leaving Kyle alone in the house. He wandered into the living room, feeling uneasy. Something about Jake's demeanor bothered him. Humans were unpredictable, but this man seemed especially distrustful. When Clara returned, she looked apologetic. "Sorry about Jake. He's just protective of me. He doesn't mean any harm." Kale nodded, though he wasn't entirely reassured. Over the next few days, he noticed Jake watching him more closely whenever they crossed paths. Once, Kyle caught him inspecting the woods near Clara's house, as if searching for something. Kale wondered if Jake suspected the truth about him. Despite these challenges, Kale continued to adapt to human life. He accompanied Clara to the grocery store, where he marveled at the endless variety of products. Humans had so many options for everything. Different types of bread, dozens of flavors of chips, and countless brands of soda. Kale tried to make sense of it all, but it only added to his confusion. Why did humans need so much choice? On Zetheris, simplicity was valued. Choices were limited to ensure efficiency. One afternoon, Clara suggested they watch a movie together. She popped a disc into a device called a DVD player and settled onto the couch with a bowl of popcorn. Kyle sat beside her, intrigued. Movies, she explained, were stories told through moving pictures. The film they watched was about a group of friends going on an adventure. Cale found it fascinating, though some parts were hard to follow. Humans seemed to enjoy dramatic moments filled with emotion, even if those emotions contradicted logic. As the credits rolled, Clara turned to him. "What did you think?" "It was interesting," Cale said slowly. "Humans place great importance on relationships." Clara smiled. "That's true. Relationships are what make life meaningful." Cale considered this. Relationships were rare among Vaylons who prioritized individual growth and contribution to society. Emotions were seen as distractions, barriers to progress. Yet here, humans thrived on connection, building bonds with family, friends, and even strangers. It was a concept Cale struggled to grasp, but he couldn't deny its appeal. Over time, Cale began to notice small details about Clara's behavior. She often hummed when she was happy and sighed when she was tired or frustrated. Her moods shifted frequently, sometimes within minutes. One moment she might be laughing at a silly joke, and the next, she could be tearing up over a sad story. Cale found these fluctuations baffling but also captivating. Humans wore their emotions openly, unlike Vaylons, who kept theirs hidden. 1. Evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Clara asked him a question. "Do you miss your home?" Cale paused, considering his answer. "It is different here. Everything is chaotic. But I am learning." Clara nodded. "I imagine it must be hard for you. You're so far away from everything familiar." "Yes," Kyle admitted, "but I am curious about humans. You are intriguing." Clara laughed softly. "Well, I hope you find us worth the trouble." Kyle didn't respond immediately. He gazed at the horizon, where the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. Humans were indeed troublesome, emotional, and unpredictable. But they were also warm, creative, and full of surprises. Living with a human was extremely bizarre, but it was also begin. Cale's time on Earth was passing quickly, and he was starting to feel more comfortable in Clara's home. The days were filled with new experiences, from learning how to fold laundry to understanding the rules of board games. Clara was patient. With him, always ready to explain things when he didn't understand. But despite her kindness, Kyle still found humans baffling. Their emotions were unpredictable, their habits strange, and their logic often seemed non-existent. One morning, Clara woke up looking pale and tired. She moved slowly around the kitchen, barely speaking as she prepared breakfast. Kyle noticed immediately that something was wrong. Normally, Clara was full of energy, humming songs and talking about her plans for the day. Today she was quiet, her shoulders slumped as if carrying a heavy weight. "Are you unwell?" Cale asked cautiously. Clara shook her head but didn't look at him. "No, I'm fine. Just tired." Cale frowned. Humans sometimes lied to avoid burdening others, a behavior he had read about but still didn't fully understand. He decided to observe her closely throughout the day. By afternoon, Clara retreated to her room, closing the door behind her. Kyle hesitated outside, unsure if he should knock. Eventually, he heard muffled sounds coming from inside, soft sobs that made his chest tighten uncomfortably. He knocked, gently. "Clara, may I enter?" There was a pause before she replied, her voice shaky. "Yes." When Kyle stepped inside, he saw Clara sitting on the edge of her bed, her face wet with tears. She looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "I got some bad news today," she said quietly. "My dad passed away." Cale froze. Death was a concept he understood intellectually, but he had never witnessed grief firsthand. On Zitharis, death was treated as a logical conclusion to life, a process handled with efficiency and detachment. Here, it seemed to bring overwhelming pain. Cale didn't know what to say or do. He stood awkwardly, analyzing the situation. "I am sorry for your loss," he said finally, repeating a phrase he had memorized from human etiquette guides. Clara managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Kyle." Kyle wanted to help, but he didn't know how. He offered to make her tea, thinking it might be a comforting gesture, but Clara declined. Instead, she asked him to sit beside her. For a while, they sat in silence, the weight of her sadness filling the room. Cale felt helpless, unable to fix the problem or ease her pain. It was frustrating for someone who valued solutions and efficiency. That night, Kyle stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. Clara's grief troubled him deeply. He couldn't stop thinking about her tears, the way her body had shaken as she cried. Emotions were supposed to be inefficient, yet they held so much power over humans. Cale realized he needed to understand them better if he wanted to truly grasp what it meant to live with a human. The next day, he spent hours researching human emotions online. He read articles, watched videos, and even tried practicing facial expressions in front of a mirror. Humans expressed feelings through their eyes, their smiles, and even the smallest tilt of their heads. Kyle mimicked these gestures, though they felt unnatural to him. He also learned that laughter could mean joy, nervousness, or even discomfort, depending on the context. It was all so complicated. Meanwhile, Jake continued to watch Cale suspiciously. One afternoon, while Cale was walking in the woods near Clara's house, Jake appeared suddenly, blocking his path. "What are you really doing here?" Jake demanded, his arms crossed. Cale hesitated. He couldn't reveal the truth, but lying outright would only make things worse. "I am here to learn about humans," he said carefully. Jake narrowed his eyes. "That's what Clara says, but I don't buy it. You're hiding something." Cale sighed inwardly. Humans were perceptive in ways he hadn't anticipated. "If I tell you something, will you keep it secret?" Jake frowned but nodded. "Depends on what it is." Cale took a deep breath. "I am not from this world. I am here as part of an exchange program to study humans." For a moment, Jake just stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then, to Cale's surprise, he laughed. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Yes," Kyle replied firmly. "I am serious." Jake rubbed the back of his neck, looking conflicted. "All right, let's say I believe you. What do you want from us?" "Nothing harmful," Cale assured him. "I only wish to understand your species." Jake studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Fine. I won't tell anyone. But if you hurt Clara, I'll figure out a way to expose you." Kyle agreed, relieved that Jake hadn't reacted with fear or anger. Over the next few days, Jake began treating him differently, less hostile and more curious. He started asking questions about Cale's home planet and shared stories about his own life. Cale found himself opening up in return, explaining how Valons lived and why emotions were discouraged among his people. Through these conversations, Cale gained a deeper appreciation for human relationships. Jake cared deeply about Clara, willing to protect her even from someone as unusual as Cale. It reminded him of how Clara had comforted him during his struggles to adapt. Humans formed bonds easily, trusting and supporting each other despite their flaws. As Clara began to heal from her father's passing, she invited Cale to join her in planting flowers in the garden. It was a ritual she used to share with her dad, and she wanted to honor his memory by continuing it. Cale helped her dig holes in the soil and place seeds inside, following her instructions carefully. As they worked side by side, Clara talked about her childhood, sharing memories of her father teaching her how to ride a bike or bake cookies. "He wasn't perfect," Clara admitted, brushing dirt off her hands. "But he loved me, and I loved him. That's what mattered most." Cale thought about this later that evening. Love was a powerful emotion, one that drove humans to care for each other, mourn their losses, and celebrate their joys. It wasn't Efficient, but it gave their lives meaning. Cale realized that perhaps emotions weren't weaknesses after all. Maybe they were strengths, allowing humans to connect in ways Veilons never could. Over time, Cale grew closer to both Clara and Jake. They taught him how to play card games, introduced him to new foods, and included him in their conversations. In return, Cale shared stories about Zetheris, describing its towering cities and advanced technology. Clara and Jake listened with wide eyes, fascinated by his descriptions of alien landscapes and scientific marvels. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Clara turned to Cale with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think you'll miss us when you leave?" Cale paused, considering the question. He had come to Earth to study humans, but he hadn't expected to form attachments. Clara's warmth, Jake's protectiveness, and the chaotic beauty of human life had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Yes," he admitted. "I believe I will." Clara smiled softly. "Well, we'll miss you too." Cale looked up at the sky, where countless stars twinkled like tiny lights. Humans were emotional, messy, and unpredictable, but they were also kind, creative, and resilient. Living with a human was extremely bizarre, but it was also profoundly rewarding. Cale's time on Earth was nearing its end, and he could feel the weight of his impending departure settling over him. The days had flown by in a blur of laughter, confusion, and discovery. Clara and Jake had become more than just hosts or acquaintances. They were friends, people who had opened their lives to him despite his strangeness. But now, as the final weeks approached, Kyle found himself reflecting on everything he had learned and wondering how he would say goodbye. One afternoon, Clara asked Cale to help her fix her car. It was an old vehicle that often broke down, and she usually relied on Jake for repairs. This time, however, she thought it might be a good opportunity for Kyle to learn something new. "It's not rocket science," she joked, handing him a toolbox. Cale didn't understand the phrase, but nodded anyway, determined to try. The task seemed simple enough at first. Clara showed him how to remove the damaged part and replace it with a new one. Cale listened carefully, mimicking her movements as best he could. But when it came time to reconnect the wires, things went wrong. Kyle accidentally touched two exposed ends together, causing a small spark that startled both of them. Clara jumped back, letting out a surprised yelp, while Cale stood frozen, unsure what he had done. "Oh no," Clara muttered, inspecting the damage. "I think you fried the circuit." Cale felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He hadn't meant to cause harm, but his lack of experience had led to disaster. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I will find a way to fix this." Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's okay, Cale. Accidents happen. We'll just have to take it to a mechanic." But Kyle couldn't let it go. To him, mistakes were unacceptable, especially ones that caused inconvenience to others. That evening, after Clara went to bed, he snuck out to the garage and examined the car again. Using his Veilon knowledge, he retrieved a small device from his hidden teleportation orb, a tool capable of repairing mechanical systems. Carefully, he worked through the night, fixing the damaged circuit and ensuring the car ran smoothly. The next morning, Clara was shocked to find her car working perfectly. "How did you do this?" she asked, looking at Cale with wide eyes. "I repaired it," Cale replied simply, avoiding further explanation. Clara didn't press him, though she gave him a curious glance before driving off to run errands. Despite his success, the incident left Cale feeling uneasy. He realized that even with good intentions, his actions could have consequences he didn't fully understand. Humans valued honesty and effort, but they also forgave mistakes. Cale wasn't sure if he had handled the situation correctly, and the uncertainty lingered in his mind. Later that week, Jake stopped by to check on Clara's car. When he heard about the repair, he raised an eyebrow. "You fixed it yourself?" he asked Cale skeptically. Yes, Cale said, meeting Jake's gaze. I wanted to make up for my error. Jake studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. Well, I guess that shows responsibility. Still, don't go messing with stuff you don't know about. Cale agreed, though he knew Jake's warning came from concern rather than anger. Over time, Jake had warmed up to him, treating him less like a stranger and more like a friend. They spent hours talking about everything from mechanics to human history, sharing stories and exchanging ideas. Cale appreciated Jake's straightforwardness, a trait that reminded him of his own people, but with a warmth that was uniquely human. As the days passed, Cale grew more aware of the bond he shared with Clara and Jake. They included him in their daily routines, laughing at his attempts to master human customs and patiently explaining things he didn't understand. Clara often teased him about his inability to dance, while Jake challenged him to games of chess, which Cale won almost every time. These moments brought them closer together, creating memories Cale knew he would carry with him long after he left Earth. One evening, Clara decided to throw a small gathering at her house. She invited a few neighbors, including Jake, and prepared snacks and drinks for everyone. Cale watched nervously as the guests arrived, unsure how to act around so many humans at once. Clara noticed his discomfort and pulled him aside. "Just relax," she whispered. "Be yourself. They'll like you." The party turned out to be livelier than Cale expected. People laughed, told stories, and played music loudly. At first, Cale stayed on the sidelines, observing the interactions with fascination. Humans were loud and energetic, yet there was a sense of connection that filled the room. Slowly, he began to join in, answering questions about his home planet, and sharing amusing anecdotes about his time on Earth. When someone suggested playing charades, Cale hesitated. He had never participated in such a game before, but Clara encouraged him to give it a try. To his surprise, he found himself enjoying the challenge of acting out clues without speaking. The others cheered him on, laughing when he exaggerated his gestures or made funny faces. For the first time, Cale felt truly accepted, as if he belonged among them. After the party ended, Clara and Jake helped Cale clean up. As they worked, Clara turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You've changed a lot since you got here," she said softly. "You're more relaxed, more human." Kyle smiled faintly. "Living with humans has been strange but enlightening. You have taught me much about emotions, relationships, and resilience." Jake chuckled. "Yeah, we're pretty great, aren't we?" Clara rolled her eyes playfully but nodded. "We may not be perfect, but we know how to take care of each other." Kyle thought about this as he lay in bed that night. Humans weren't logical or efficient, but they were kind, creative, and deeply connected to one another. Their flaws made them unique. Their emotions gave them strength, and their capacity for love and forgiveness inspired him. Living with a human was indeed extremely bizarre, but it was also beautiful in ways he hadn't anticipated. The following day, Cale decided to create a gift for Clara and Jake as a token of gratitude. Using materials from his teleportation orb, he crafted a small crystal that projected holographic images of Zetheris. When activated, it displayed shimmering views of his home planet, its towering spires, glowing skies, and vast landscapes. He presented it to them during dinner, explaining its significance. "This is amazing," Clara said, holding the crystal in awe. "Thank you, Cale." Jake nodded approvingly. "It's a reminder of where you come from, and maybe a bridge between our worlds." Cale felt a lump rise in his throat, though he didn't cry. Crying was still too foreign, too raw an emotion for him to express. Instead, he smiled, knowing that his time on Earth had changed him forever. Humans were chaotic, unpredictable, and flawed, but they were also extraordinary. As the final days slipped away, Kyle prepared to leave. He packed his belongings, though there wasn't much to take with him. Most of what he valued couldn't fit into a bag: memories, lessons, and friendships. On his last night, Clara and Jake joined him outside under the stars. They talked quietly, sharing hopes and dreams for the future. "Promise you'll come back someday," Clara said, her voice tinged with sadness. Cale hesitated before nodding. "If I can, I will." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky stretch endlessly above them. Then, as dawn approached, Cale stood and walked toward the woods where his teleportation device waited. Before stepping inside, he turned to look at Clara and Jake one last time. They waved, smiling despite the tears in their eyes, and then, with a flash of light, Cale was gone. Cale stepped out of the teleportation chamber and into the sterile, metallic world of Zitheris. The air was cool and sharp, carrying the faint hum of machinery that powered the planet's towering cities. Everything around him was familiar: the angular architecture, the precise movements of his fellow Veilons, and the absence of chaos or unpredictability. Yet, as Cale stood there, he felt a strange emptiness in his chest, something he couldn't quite explain. The Veilon council members greeted him formally, their voices calm and measured. They asked him to share his findings about humans, eager to hear what he had learned during his time on Earth. Cale nodded, knowing this moment would define how his people viewed humanity. He walked to the central chamber, where holographic screens displayed data and images from his reports. As he began speaking, his words flowed steadily, but his thoughts drifted back to Clara and Jake, to the warmth of their laughter and the kindness in their eyes. "Humans are emotional beings," Cale explained. "They express joy, sadness, anger, and love openly. These emotions drive their actions, shaping their relationships and decisions." One council member tilted his head slightly, a gesture of curiosity among Veilons. "Emotions are inefficient. How do they function with such distractions?" Cale hesitated before responding. "Emotions may not be efficient, but they give humans strength. They motivate them to care for one another, to create art, and to overcome challenges. Without emotions, they would not be who they are." The council exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Cale continued, describing the small house where he had lived, the cluttered kitchen where Clara cooked meals, and the garden where she planted flowers in memory of her father. He talked about Jake's protectiveness, his suspicion turning into trust, and the bond they had formed over shared stories and games. Each detail painted a picture of human life, messy, imperfect, but deeply meaningful. As Cale spoke, he realized how much he missed them. Clara's cheerful voice echoed in his mind, her laughter ringing like music. Jake's steady presence reminded him of the value of loyalty and friendship. He thought about the times they had laughed together, argued, and supported one another through difficult moments. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but that unpredictability made them special. When Cale finished his report, the council remained silent for a long moment. Then, one of them spoke. "Your observations are intriguing. We will analyze this data further." Cale bowed respectfully and left the chamber. As he walked through the city, he noticed the silence pressing against him, the lack of sound or movement beyond what was necessary. Back on Earth, even the quietest moments had been filled with life, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, the soft hum of conversation. Here, everything felt cold and distant. That night, Cale sat alone in his quarters, staring at the crystal he had kept from the gift he had given Clara and Jake. It still held holographic images of Zitheris, but now it also contained memories of Earth. He activated it, watching as scenes of Clara's home and the starry sky above unfolded before him. For a moment, he could almost hear Clara's voice, feel the warmth of her smile, and see Jake's teasing grin. Cale knew he couldn't return to Earth immediately, but he promised himself he would find a way someday. Until then, he would carry those memories with him, letting them guide him as he navigated the structured world of Zetheris. Perhaps, he thought, his experience could help bridge the gap between humans and Veilons, showing both species the value of understanding and connection. Days turned into weeks, and Kyle resumed his duties among his people. He worked efficiently, completing tasks with precision, but something had shifted within him. He began questioning the rigid logic that governed Veilon society, wondering if there was room for emotion alongside reason. His questions drew curious looks from others, but Cale didn't mind. He had seen the beauty of imperfection, and he couldn't unsee it. One evening, Cale visited the archives, searching for records of past interactions with humans. He discovered old documents detailing encounters that had ended in misunderstanding or conflict. Many Veilons viewed humans as primitive, irrational, and dangerous. But Cale saw something different. He saw potential for growth, for collaboration, for mutual respect. Inspired, Cale began drafting proposals for future cultural exchanges. He suggested sending more Veilons to Earth, not just to study humans, but to build relationships. He emphasized the importance of empathy, urging his people to look beyond efficiency and embrace the complexities of emotion. His ideas sparked debates among the council, some dismissing them as impractical, while others listened with cautious interest. Meanwhile, Cale kept the crystal close, replaying its images whenever he felt overwhelmed by the monotony of Zetheris. It reminded him of Clara's resilience, Jake's humor, and the countless ways humans found meaning in their lives. He remembered the night they had sat under the stars talking about family, dreams, and the universe. That moment had felt infinite, full of possibilities he had never imagined before. Months passed, and Cale's proposals gained traction. The council agreed to expand the cultural exchange program, allowing more Veilons to visit Earth and interact with humans. Cale volunteered to lead the initiative, determined to foster understanding between the two species. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Humans and Veilons were vastly different, but he believed the effort was worth it. Finally, the day came when Cale prepared to return to Earth. This time, he wasn't alone. A small group of Veilons accompanied him, each eager to learn about human life. As they materialized in the woods near Clara's house, Cale felt a surge of excitement. He walked toward the familiar path leading to her home, his heart beating faster than ever before. Clara was outside tending to her garden when she spotted him. At first, she froze, unsure if she was dreaming. Then, recognition dawned on her face, and she ran toward him, laughing and crying all at once. "Cale, you're back!" Cale smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Yes, I am back." Jake appeared moments later, shaking his head in disbelief. "I didn't think we'd see you again." "You did promise," Clara added, wiping tears from her cheeks. Cale nodded. "And I always keep my promises." Over the next few days, Clara and Jake introduced the other Veilons to human customs, teaching them how to cook, play games, and appreciate the little things in life. Cale watched as his people slowly opened up, their stiff expressions softening as they experienced the joys of human connection. It wasn't perfect. There were misunderstandings and awkward moments, but progress was being made. One evening, as they all gathered around a bonfire, Clara turned to Cale with a thoughtful look. "Do you think we'll ever truly understand each other?" Cale gazed at the flames, their flickering light reflecting in his eyes. "Perhaps not completely. But understanding isn't about perfection. It's about trying, about sharing our worlds and learning from one another." Clara smiled, leaning back against Jake. "Well, we're glad you're here." Kale looked around at the faces illuminated by the fire, human and Valon alike. Living with a human was indeed extremely bizarre, but it was also profoundly rewarding. And as he sat there, surrounded by friends from two worlds, Kyle knew he had found something far greater than logic or efficiency. He had found connection, and that was worth everything.